I have been going to amusement parks my entire life. I've visited almost every major park in the United States, and I've also gone to Europe a few times specifically to visit theme parks. And it doesn't take long to notice some major differences between how the parks overseas are run and those back home. So in this video, I wanted to point out 20 differences between American and European theme parks. These are generalizations, so they won't apply to all theme parks. I'm looking at it holistically. I'll have 4 categories I'll talk about: the arrival experience, park operations, ride operations, and miscellaneous. I'll start with the arrival experience. Number 1. Parks in Europe are much easier to access via public transit. You can often get between a major city center and the closest theme park using a series of trains and buses. The same system will allow you to cover large distances in between distant parks. That is not the case in America. You usually will need a car to get to the park unless the park itself is located in a major city. If you don't drive, you can hire a taxi or an Uber, but that will be costlier than the comparable public transit option overseas. Number 2. In the United States, you typically pay for parking at a toll booth when you arrive. In Europe, you pay for parking when you're leaving at most parks. You can either purchase your ticket online, at the ticket booths, or at dedicated machines. The European method makes it faster and easier to get into the park in the morning, but it can amplify the log jams at closing time when you're trying to leave. Number 3. In Europe, many people still use the physical ticket booths. In the United States, most people purchase their admission online, which is why there are so few ticket windows in use here. Some parks scrap the ticket booths entirely and redirect on-site purchases to guest relations. It's possible to buy tickets online for most European parks, and I'd recommend doing that. Number 4. In Europe, very few parks have metal detectors or bag checks as you enter, even the larger ones. In the United States, it's the standard at most parks, big or small. This is usually the bottleneck in the morning when people are trying to get into an American park. I'm all for whatever parks need to do to keep people safe, and it doesn't seem to be needed overseas. Number 5. In Europe, you have more freedom with what you can bring into parks. Most US parks ban outside food and drinks. In Europe, people routinely bring snacks, meals, and drinks with them. Further, some US parks have started to ban or restrict bag sizes, especially after some incidents at Halloween events. I have not seen something similar take place overseas. In fact, bags are much more common in Europe, possibly because of the extra freedom. Next, I'll talk about the park operations. Number 6. In America, particularly at the larger parks owned by Six Flags SeaWorld and Cedar Fair, paid lockers are required for bags before you enter the queue line for major rides. These parks often ban you from storing belongings on the ride platform in the name of faster operations. In Europe, these parks usually allow all belongings to be placed on the ride platform, and those that don't typically offer free lockers or cubbies while you ride. This ties into the European parks being much more bag-friendly. Number 7. In Europe, running is allowed. When parks open for the day, there's usually a mad dash to the respective park's most popular ride. It adds a sense of excitement at the start of the day, in my opinion. Then you can also run at other points of the day as well, like if you're trying to get across the park for one last ride before the park closes. In America, almost every park bans running at all times of the day. Employees will tell you to stop or chide you if they see you running. I get this is for safety and to avoid lawsuits, but I didn't notice anyone getting hurt overseas. People were careful not to run in densely packed areas and or trample people. Number 8. In Europe, parks will stay open in the rain and inclement weather. Most rides will remain in operation too unless they physically cannot run in the rain, like Intamin hydraulic launch coasters, or if there's thunder and lightning. Europeans also seem less bothered by rain, as the difference in crowds between a clear and rainy day is much less pronounced than it is in America. Visiting parks in days with poor weather is a gamble in the United States. On one hand, you'll have very light crowds. On the other hand, expect reduced operations. Some parks won't even open. Some parks will stop running their rides in the slightest of rain. Then many parks will use the bad weather as an excuse to close early. They'll cite the weather, but it's really to cut their operational losses on days with low attendance. This is presumably tied to how US parks pay their employees. In the US, they're paid for the hours they physically work. In Europe, employees are paid for their contractual hours. Since the employees get paid their money regardless, the parks have every incentive to remain open to get the cash they can. Number 9. In Europe, parks tend to close earlier, even the larger ones. I think a lot of this is related to the parks being closer to houses and villages than their US counterparts, and the parks having to be respectful of noise and traffic concerns. The exceptions are those in major city centers. Those ones usually stay open really late, which makes sense given the increased noise in the area. Number 10. In Europe, closing time usually represents when the final cycle is completed. Many parks want the last train dispatched right at closing time, so they will close lines early to ensure this. I think this is tied to the contractual hours and noise items I previously discussed. In America, closing time usually represents when the physical queue lines are closed, and then everyone else in line can still ride. Number 11. In America, almost every park will give you a cup of free tap water if you ask at any food or beverage location. The same cannot be said at European parks. Expect to have to buy bottled water there, and if you are thinking about using drinking fountains, those aren't nearly as common overseas. Number 12. In Europe, guests are often allowed to walk or relax in grassy areas. In the United States, most parks want guests staying on the pathways. Next, I'll talk about ride operations. Number 13. Europe has some self-operated rides. Riders board their own vehicles, secure themselves, and press a button to operate some of the rides. Not only that, there isn't always an employee in the immediate area watching. You would never get that type of freedom in the United States. Number 14. In Europe, employees don't always physically check the restraints. Some do, particularly on the more extreme ones or if you're visiting a larger corporate park. But on some rides, employees simply do spot checks. Or they'll just trust that a guest will lower their own restraint. In the United States, almost every park will physically touch your restraint to verify it's down and locked. Number 15. In Europe, operations are faster. Part of that is tied to the previous item, but I've also noticed that crews in Europe tend to be older, and I suspect there's more retention. Plus, rides tend to have less restrictive restraints. You're less likely to see the redundant safety belts you'll see in America. Number 16. In Europe, rides have less monitoring. For example, log flumes in the US typically have an employee stationed atop the drops to make sure that guests do not stand up. You won't see that at the European theme parks. A lot more trust is given to the guests. Number 17. In Europe, GoPros are usually allowed in most rides and attractions. There are some parks that don't allow it, like those in the Merlin chain, but it's rarer to see a park ban them than allow them. In the United States, it's the opposite. Most parks ban on-ride filming. This was not always the case, but most parks cracked down when cell phones started becoming more common. Finally, I want to touch on a few miscellaneous observations. Number 18. In Europe, ride merchandise is less widespread, and if it's available, it tends to be more subtle. Typically, the merchandise will only show the ride logo. In the United States, you have these bombastic shirts and hats with stats and ride track going every which direction. And one item I wish more European parks had were those nano coasters from Coaster Dynamics. I love those models. Number 19. In Europe, on-site hotels and accommodations seem to be more common. This is almost always a certainty at the larger parks, but even some of the smaller ones have either a campground or smaller hotel on property. In America, very few parks have on-site hotels. Parks over here instead rely on the nearby hotel chains. Number 20. In Europe, parks tend to place a greater emphasis on theming, whereas US parks tend to put a greater emphasis onto the ride itself. As a theme park fan, I love the approach of adding more theming. Visuals and music go a long way to enhancing an individual attraction and an overall area. So those are 20 of the biggest differences I've noticed between European and American theme parks. What are your thoughts on this list? Are there any key differences you think I missed? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you gave this video a like, and you considered subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.